Welcome to another episode of the Virginia Investor Podcast. Today we have Rick Jarvis, a real estate investor and co-founder of One South Realty, who now is with Sampson Properties. I am excited to get into your story. Over the years, I've heard a ton about you. I've worked with One South very closely. I have a lot of relationships over there. You guys have done incredible work. I am excited to hear about how you got into all this thing, how you built such a big team under you, and then what sort of evolutions you guys have been through throughout that process. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. This is my first podcast.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I don't, all right. Glad to be here. What do I do with my hands?
That's awesome. Well, I'm glad you accepted the invitation, because you definitely have been on the list, and I've wanted to talk to you and kind of learn your story a little bit more. We met a number of years ago. I've worked with your former partner, Tom Rossman, who was on episode 6 of this podcast. And we did a lot of stuff together, him and his team. And then by way, we've kind of, I guess through osmosis or whatever, we've ended up working with a lot of One South Realty on the residential side and a lot of those agents over there. Tons of respect for what you guys have built, and I'm excited to get into the story. I know a lot about Tom. I'm looking forward to learn a lot more about you and how you guys have helped shaped the real estate landscape of Richmond.
That's very kind.
Let's start from the beginning. Where were you born?
I'm basically about as Richmond as you can get. Born here, raised here, high school here, college here. So, I don't really have any other marketable skills other than I'm from Richmond. So,
awesome.
So I don't know how to live anywhere else. I don't know how other people kind of leave their hometowns and raise families or whatever without the support. So, no, Monacan kid, little dude from the South Side, public school educated, and, never really left.
What did your parents do for a living?
Dad was a VMI grad, civil engineer. Awesome. Mom was a kind of a teacher, tutor at a small school on South Side. And so, just kind of, your typical middle class, colonial, on a half-acre lot, kind of raised, and buddies in the neighborhood, ride bikes, play sports, that kind of stuff.
So you played sports, ride bikes. Were you focused on grades at all, like a good A-plus student, or were you focused on other things?
I would describe myself not as an A-plus student at all. I think I'm kind of probably like most people in this business, right? Like you had maybe some really good, where grades were easy to get, I got the good ones. Right. Where they were hard, I wasn't too interested. And so, as you can ride that wave through, especially if you can, throw a ball or whatever. And so that kind of got me to, probably open some doors that maybe I would not have opened had I, had not had, a little more studying.
What did you think about money growing up? Like really like middle school, high school, like was it just to pay the bills, or did you have some inkling of like finance and investing and stuff like that?
I mean, I was pretty oblivious. Yeah. I think like most kids are, I don't know, I say most kids, I assume that, most kids kind of don't really pay attention to it.
Right.
I was fortunate enough to go to University of Richmond, and that surrounds, a lot of people with a lot more wealth. And so you kind of start raising eyebrows then, like, like what, how did this happen, or, whatever. But I mean, it didn't really, again, I like to tell people I was just kind of raised in a locker room.
Right.
So it's more of a meritocracy, I guess, than anything else. And so, that's just kind of how I've kind of walked through life with, it's less about where you start, it's more like where you finish relative.
Right.
And so that's kind of how I try to view the world, I guess.
What did baseball do for you growing up?
Got me a scholarship, got me, some notoriety and things like that. And so, I was telling somebody the other day, it's almost like, I think in many ways like quarterbacks are their own fraternity. I think, I was a pitcher. And so, kind of a lot of my friends pitched, and we all have, the same war stories about how the arms hurt and all these kind of things. Yeah. And so, but there's sort of a beautiful misery in that, and that it's a very public thing. So when you screw up, when you give up the 500-foot home run over the fence, whatever, it's on you. So I've always kind of, I think, migrated to positions where, I don't care what the public, I know that it's going to be viewed by the public, but I don't really care necessarily. It's more just, can we, there's an insular nature to that. And I like those types of situations.
This is way off subject, but did you ever see anyone get the yips? Are you familiar with that?
With golf or with baseball?
With baseball.
I remember Rick Ankiel couldn't throw a strike after they put him in center field, and there was another guy for the Cubs. I can't remember, but yeah, they just all of a sudden just lost their ability to throw a strike.
It's insane.
So,
I've seen it. I've heard about it a lot in baseball. I could see where it happens in golf. I haven't heard about it in golf, but I could see where that happens.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of, especially around the putter. And Ian Baker Finch famously lost his ability to hit a golf ball straight, and after winning like the British Open. So, Yeah, there's a lot of cases throughout history.
Yeah,
So, thank you for, by the way, now ruining me next time I go play golf. I'm gonna be thinking about not getting the yips, which is like, basically the invitation to get the yips.
Right. Yeah. I think about that. You're on the mound as a pitcher, and like the entire game, or at least it feels this way, that the entire game rests on you and your ability to pitch. That's a real thing. Like, people get in those high risk situations and they just like psychologically break. And it's I don't know. I have a lot of respect for people who could stand on a mound in that pressure situation, hit a golf ball, or take shoot a free throw or something like that in a championship game, or World Cup's playing now, take a PK shot in overtime or whatever, and not absolutely blow it, and like just be a professional.
The one little thing I think will go. I remember somebody telling me that anytime you're in one of those situations, it's not necessarily like your ability to execute. It has as much to do with your opponent's inability to execute as well. So it's like it's almost a battle of nerves. Whoever's less nervous tends to win in those situations, given somewhat equal skills. So I just always kind of remembered that, like, hey, if the heart's kind of pounding or whatever, odds are the other guy's is too. And so if I just if I can just control my emotion a little bit better, I think I might have the advantage. So.
Yeah,
don't know if it works, but that's what I tell myself.
That's a great way to think about it. I mean, you especially in real estate, like, two people are negotiating. They likely both want the deal to happen, and both people are probably a little nervous. So if you feel nervous, the chances are the other guy does too.
The battle of who could care less to some extent. Yeah, I think actually it was funny. In your conversation with Duke Dodson, he talked about. One of his mentors kind of had this superpower of not caring.
Right.
I'm not getting that exactly right. It's not like you don't have any care, but it's like you freed yourself from the result.
Right.
Focus on the process, the results will come, and if they don't, fix the process.
Right.
But I think sometimes we get anchored too much on results versus process.
Right.
And so,
That's right. And the statement was something along the lines of the inability or the ability not to care is a superpower,
right?
Or the ability not to basically think too much about things and get overwhelmed by that is a superpower. And as a business owner of a growing business, and you have a larger team now, you want everyone to love you, and you want all of your clients and all of your tenants and all of your everyone that you deal with to love you. And if that one person, that one vendor, or the one tenant is mad at you, and it wastes your whole day and wastes your whole week, that's very unproductive. And you're not going to scale or grow to a certain extent if you don't have that ability to just be like, it's on them, it's not on me, let's keep going.
I think one of the most important moments that any business owner will have is when they recognize that perfection is unattainable.
Right.
And until you make peace with that, you're going to continue to chase down the one bad review, and it's going to, you're going to obsess over it. And so I think it's a similar concept, maybe stated a little bit differently, but I think once, we got over not having a perfect record on every front.
Right.
We were able to grow a lot better and faster and more effectively because, again, we weren't chasing down the things that were unsolvable anyway. Let it go. Get on to the next one.
I'll tell you, I wish I would have had this same conversation 6 years ago. We would get a 1-star review from a tenant that we might need to evict, or that couldn't, whatever the situation was, and I would carry that with me for a week at a time and just try to go to crazy lengths to talk to the tenant and please the tenant and do all of these things to basically stop the whole show and see what we could do to satisfy this person. And to that point, we would have never. Eventually, I had to learn that you just can't control everything, right? And so the person who said whatever we're paraphrasing now owns a very large. We're talking maybe 30,000 unit property management company, and that was his point. Is he never would have gotten to that scale, and he probably wants to get double the size. He never would get to double the size if he cared so much about the one-star review that came in last week or something like that. Which
I think you just have to have kind of a little bit of an objective view of it, right? Is it a legitimate complaint? If so,
then
deal with it and
sure.
change. And if it's just someone who's being unreasonable or whatever, again, you're just never going to satisfy them. Then okay, move on to the things that are most productive. And so again, there's I think for when you first start out, you have this view that you're going to be something that is unattainable, and once you kind of make peace with the fact that you're not going to get to that level, I think again you become a much better owner, leader, whatever it may be.
It can be attainable if you don't grow. If you keep it at talking property management terms, if you keep it to 100 units under management, it can be very attainable to be all keep everyone happy and please everyone. It would still be hard even at 100 units. And on the realty side of things, sell 5 houses a year. You probably won't step on any toes. You can probably keep everyone happy. You can
Right.
probably keep all your relationships intact. But if you're trying to grow and do something for your family and your team and the community and stuff, there's going to be some stuff that is out of your control. You're not going to be able to please everyone.
Yeah.
It really took me a few years to reason with that, because I came from the fitness industry where
Right.
everyone is happy and you're helping people get faster and stronger and healthier and reach their goals, and like that drove me. And then you come here and you try to do the same thing to help tenants, to help vendors, to help clients, to help everyone. And then when people aren't always happy with you, it's brutal, man.
Yeah. You guys are basically umpires, right? Where if you do everything perfect, nobody says anything. But the minute you sort of miss one call, they scream bloody murder.
Right,
You know,
100%.
my industry, you know, you get both ends, right? Like if you do a great job, they hug it out and they refer you, and they're you know, the glowing recommendations and all that kind of stuff. And if you screw something up, you know, you get the opposite. But at least I feel like the upside in more of the sales space,
Right.
there's both, right?
Right.
So it's it's like if you do your perfect job there, you do get really rewarded by
Right.
it, and that's a pretty big endorphin rush when you get that.
Yeah.
Again, in your business, it's like if you do everything perfect, nobody says
Yeah,
anything.
it's a little
It's
different.
just expected,
Yeah.
right? So
We've,
on a scale of 1 to 10, your max is 5.
Right. We've had a client where we literally saved like $3,000 on a repair for a single family house, and the repair ended up costing like a few $100s. We found some really unconventional way to go about it, fix it, and then the client like was really mad at us for costing them $200.
Yeah.
And I'm like, all right,
Yeah.
man.
Again.
Anyway, and we've all, that's in every industry, you know, we've all felt that. But so baseball, you go to college and you're playing baseball, which is probably a different experience. Are you able to keep up like with academics and stuff like that? Are you driven solely towards like a career in baseball, or are you really focusing on, okay, what happens if baseball isn't always there?
I don't know that I was smart enough to know that it wasn't going to be there. You know, I think everybody probably deep down inside has this view of the world that, you know, they can get to some level. You know, from an academic perspective, I think honestly it was weird. I went back and I looked. I had a full GPA point higher during the non-season than I did during the season, because there's so much travel and, you know,
Right.
so much practice or whatever. You know, and it kind of forces you to keep your nose clean, and it's hard to get in a lot of trouble when you're tired or, you know, whatever. And so when you have responsibility. So, I think it was a good thing. But I never really, you know, I tended to probably migrate towards things academically that were easier for me, and kind of stay away from the ones that were really difficult. Like
Right.
I went to the business school at Richmond, and one of the reasons I went to the business school is because you didn't have to take a foreign language.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
that's a really great reason to choose business, is because
Right.
I don't want to take, you know, college Spanish or whatever.
Right.
So, you know, anyway, but you know, when I got to the classes that I liked, I tended to do a lot better because I just found them easier and engaging or whatever,
Right.
and you know, the accountings of the world and things like that I just wasn't as probably fluent in.
Right.
You know, I didn't enjoy this nearly as much, and it was much more of a kind of a slog. Necessary, but it was a slog.
What were you thinking that you were going to do once you got out of college? Again, was it like all baseball, or did you have a career lined up?
I had no idea.
Yeah.
You know, getting out in '91 so I graduated in '91. You know, it was on the heels of the '87 crash, and so the market still had not really recovered at that point in time. So jobs were not prevalent. Did some interviews or whatever, but never really landed anything big. You know, you kind of come out of there with your degree, and you think like, hey, you know, the world owes me a job or whatever, and so. You know, there wasn't really any. And so, you know, kind of migrated towards things that were more commission based or whatever, where someone would take a flyer on you and you just, you know, because it didn't cost them anything to have you.
Right.
And so, you know, that was kind of how I started out. And then my wife, Sarah, had been up in D.C., and her family was kind of in the real estate business. Her father was a builder. Her sister was kind of a property manager as well back in the day. And so, you know, kind of ended up just almost by default, just kind of around real estate to the point. And then I remember one time we actually bought a little foreclosure. We didn't own any. We rented our house, but we actually not even barely rented it. We just kind of lived with a family member when we first were together, and we bought a house. It's a HUD foreclosure. They used to be in the newspaper. They weren't even in MLS, so you kind of had to know where to look. Bought it and had a contract to sell it for like $10,000 more before I'd even closed on it. And I'm like,
Interesting.
And I was like, this is legal, you know? And yeah, so okay. And then from there on out, I'm like, I got to know more.
Interesting.
So that's kind of how it got me in there. Was, you know, when you get a check for like $10,000 in 1990, and you're $50,000 in credit card
Right.
debt and car payments and all this
Right.
kind of stuff, and someone hands you a check for $10,000, you're like, okay, this is pretty addicting. So got the license at that point in time. And,
What sort of sales job were you doing before that?
I worked for a company called Virginia Asset Management. It was kind of a benefits and insurance type company.
Okay.
They've done incredibly well, and I still take a lot of the lessons from what I learned over there with
Right.
those guys back in the day. But one of the things I did notice there when we would go and meet with people is everybody owned real estate. And so it's kind of like, kind of triangulated in, I guess, just being around it, seeing the wealth, and that most of those people had holdings, kind of made me, all right, start paying a little more attention to this thing. But I was wholly unprepared for anything coming out of college other than, what I had done on, basically playing ball. So
you got into sales because you had injured your arm, right? And then
yeah, just kind of. I had an American-made arm. It only had a certain amount of miles on it before it was just going to kind of crap out. So I like to say that my coach and my elbow got together and told me to get into sales.
Yeah. So which is good. They probably saw your personality and they were like, all right, cool. You can talk to people.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's get them into sales. So you jump into sales, and then it sounds like you were working either alongside or with some high net worth individuals or high earners to some degree, and they own real estate.
I was sitting across the table from them. So wishing I was in their chair versus being the one I was in.
But you got to see how some path of how they got there, or what they do with their money once they're there, or something. And it related to real estate, and then plus your wife's family had rentals and had invested in real estate. Did you have any substantial conversations with them about investing in real estate, or did you just kind of see what they were doing?
I did probably a little bit more of the latter than the former. I don't think there was any structured this or that. I just knew that. Again, the idea of being able to buy and sell assets, one thing about being in the real estate business is if you see a deal, you can decide to take an equity stake in that deal, right? You can actually buy it and sell it and improve it or whatever. That was really appealing to me. I thought it was interesting. And so, having done that a handful of times, I was like, okay, this is a really cool business. And we started to build a little bit of a stack, not a big stack, but a little bit of a stack. And then she ended up getting working with another Duke Dodson conversation from one of your previous gentlemen by the name of Carl D. Silver that essentially built Fredericksburg. And he created a sort of a private lending bank, if you will, but it wasn't governed by banking rules. It was just a private lender. He was approached by so many people about, hey, Mr. Silver, I got a deal for you, that he just decided to turn it into a kind of an organized, I would call it an institutionalized private lender is the best way to do it. And had, I don't know, a couple $100 million on the street. And he kind of timed it perfectly down here in Richmond. He was mostly in Fredericksburg, kind of Northern Virginia and Richmond. And he timed it perfectly with the, kind of the movement towards historic renovation. And so a lot of the guys would get credit lines with Mr. Silver and then be able to go buy that warehouse and then go get it entitled and go through all the historic part 1, part 2, whatever. And then once he kind of had those stuff, once they were lined up, then he would take it. Most of them would just go to a bank. And his Mr. Silver's rate of interest was exorbitant, but he was always in first position, and if you didn't have the warehouse, you couldn't do the deal anyway. So it was a great little complementary, situation for having, the ability to go and write a check for the warehouse and then go get it entitled at a later date and take him out. And so a lot of the contacts that we still have today, we met through those relationships, and so that's it's transformative what he did in a lot of ways, and so it still trickled down some 20 years later.
That's awesome to have that sort of legacy that's really cool. So you did this, your first deal was the HUD house, and it sounds like it was a wholesale deal. You had to sign the contract for $10,000 more, and that definitely makes you think when you do something like that. And you had mentioned that happened, and then you were like, let's go get licensed. So did you really understand the difference between the investment wholesaling / rentals and flips than being licensed on the and kind of dealing with retail buyers and sellers, or did you get licensed so you could be closer to the investment side of things?
I wish I could tell you that I had a plan. Again, I just kind of knew
you just need to get in the door.
Kind of get in there and ready, fire, aim kind of thing. It's always been a little bit of the mentality, and so I don't fully understand anything that I ever do, but eventually I'll figure it out on the way, kind of, or I don't, and we stopped doing it because we couldn't figure it out. So I bought and sold a handful of them, mostly kind of again. All of the foreclosure lists or any, whether it's VA or HUD or whatever, they didn't transfer through MLS back in the day. And there was a whole bidding process you had to do, and it was different. And so if you kind of figured out the card trick, it could be a nice little business for you. And so, we did, I don't know, 20 or 30 of those over time. You buy them. Sometimes you just put carpet and paint on them, sometimes a little bit more, just depending. And then at the same time, kind of brokering for friends and family or whatever, because they kind of knew what we were doing. And I think there was, even though we were maybe selling, just kind of retailing for someone to buy their first house or whatever, the fact that we were doing the other things, I think, always made people feel as if we maybe had an edge or we knew a little something that they didn't know. And so I think that just the ability to be, or the fact that we were around that so much led to the credibility that we kind of knew what we were doing. And so that's kind of how it worked. And then when Sarah went to work for Mr. Silver, I kind of took over just the sales side of things, and she was more on the lending side of things. And then that kind of led to a little more maybe touching the development space. And so, we did a couple smaller deals ourselves, some rehabs of some, a 6-unit and a 4-unit here. And then that kind of led to the first sort of introduction of meeting with real developers, like actual people that knew what they were doing,
Right.
and developing a couple of projects, and where we ended up representing the sales of those finished products.
When you had mentioned that shortly after you got licensed, you went to a program at VCU.
Yeah.
What was that? What was that all about? What did you get out of that?
Yeah, there's a great real estate specific. It's an MBA with a concentration in real estate. I never finished the MBA part, but I took all the real estate courses.
Got it.
So there was advanced appraisal, finance development. So basically, I remember you talking about spreadsheets. Essentially, I learned to really build a nice spreadsheet back in the day.
Right.
Didn't know if they were accurate, but I
Right.
learned how to do it. And so I took a lot from that. Dr. Boykin, who's I think he's still with us. And his sons are all around. I still have my original HP 12C calculator and that we used back in the day. And I learned a tremendous amount through that, kind of more formal education.
Right.
And I think it was probably the first time in my life that I really took education a lot more seriously, because it was something I wanted to know about versus something I kind of had to know about in order to get a degree on the wall behind me.
It's a world of difference. I wish like I knew that as a kid to like, if I was passionate to like focus in that area, you'd do really well instead of wondering why you don't do so well in some areas and you do in others. But yeah, so I could imagine you go to this VCU program and you do really well because you have purpose and you have passion behind it. And so you're also doing these deals, and you're building a good network around you. It sounds like, especially with who your wife is working for.
Yeah.
With these deals, it sounds like you're doing maybe some wholesaling, some flipping. Are you holding anything yet at this point?
A couple, and I to this day I still kick myself for I wish I'd just figured out how to hold on it. But at the same time we were probably using some of that that income to stay alive or to get into the next deal or whatever.
Right.
But I think the big transformative moment was, and it was a silver deal. We ended up buying a pack of like 20 townhomes from Mr. Silver. Actually, I think from Larry, his son, who had built these houses, and then when the market turned, he just rented them out or whatever. And so we basically took over the partnership. It was just below his, to us it was all the real estate in the world. To him it was a rounding error. So he said, all right, you guys take them and whatever. And so we ended up getting like 20 townhomes. We sold a handful of them to, I don't know if you know Kyle Stevenson.
Yeah.
Kyle, who've been partners with Kyle for years on a lot of fronts. So he bought some of them, and we kept some of them, and so that then turned into the next thing, and we've 1031'd.
Awesome.
I still probably am carrying the depreciation in the 1031 into some of the properties we own today for what we did back in probably 96.
Wow.
95, 96, somewhere in the range. So fully depreciated, needless to say.
Yeah. That's incredible. That's awesome. So you kind of hit the ground running. What do you think was the contributing factor to your success shortly after getting licensed to doing all of these deals? I know they didn't all happen at once, but they happened over the years. But a lot of people, a lot of people get licensed and do 1 or 2 transactions a year and then kind of like really slow. What contributed to you being able to like kind of jump in both feet and just get after it?
I don't know. That's what you're supposed to do, right? So you just, okay, all right, go, all right, got it, let's go. It was funny, the very first broker I worked for, he sat me down in a room and gave me a contract and said, read this. So I said, okay. So I read it and I got done. He goes, okay, any questions? And I'm like, no, I guess not. And I was kind of like, okay, well, I guess my training is over, so I got to go do this. So, that kind of spilled forward to when we built One South. If we're going to bring people in and train them, I wanted to make sure that we gave them a high degree of likelihood that they would be successful.
Right.
So I think that's kind of, you can learn a lot of things along the way, sometimes what it's to do and what it's not to do.
Right.
So anyway, you kind of self-started, just kind of had to say, let's go get them. I don't really, again, I think you're asking me if I had a plan, and I really didn't.
Right.
Just
do what you need to do.
Go out there, put your chin out and,
right.
Go knock down some deals and see what you can do. But I do think that if anything, that bigger moment is when we bought that block of townhomes.
Yeah.
It was in Salem Station in Spotsylvania County. And I remember thinking to myself, and Sarah and I had this conversation, and it was like, we can't not do this. We don't really have anything at risk at this point. And, and again, they didn't really make any money, but it got us in the game. Right. And then we noticed over a couple of years, all of a sudden, the rents had bumped a little bit, the debt was down a little bit, and, huh, okay, interesting. And then, the run up to 2008 hit, and you really started to see properties accelerate in value.
Right.
And that was also another light bulb moment. Like, oh, being in the game means a lot of times you get to benefit from just being in the game.
Right.
Because when the runs come, you never know when they're going to come, how they're
Right.
going to come, and how long they're going to last. And sometimes there's a subsequent crash afterwards.
Right.
But being in the game is 99% of the battle, right? It's hard to get appreciation on something you don't know.
Right.
So,
Did Sarah ever have any? Was she ever adverse to any of this risk, or was she like, "Hey, my family owns some of this real estate. Like, I know how it works. Let's do the same thing."
I think, if anything, probably my upbringing was much more risk averse than hers. Her dad was always kind of a deal maker. And
Got it.
whatever.
Okay.
And, I think it had some ups and downs in his career, to say the least. And so, I think we both probably have a pretty similar risk tolerance. And I think, over time, we were more aggressive earlier. We're not as aggressive now, and we're a little more picky. We didn't used to be, and so that kind of,
Right.
I think it just ebbs and flows. But we basically have been on the same page about all
awesome.
this stuff for our entire, kind of collective career of working together.
When you were buying apartments in the Fan,
Mm-hmm.
was that before or after 2008? The crash.
Oh, it was before.
Before,
Yeah,
all right.
well before.
Okay, so you're buying apartments in the Fan. What tell us about for those? A lot of heavy audiences is in Richmond, surrounding counties. To understand, obviously, the Fan and what it is now. What was the Fan back then?
I don't know that the Fan has changed as much as some of the other neighborhoods. The Fan always had I think a very organized association, and they were active, and they tried to protect property values
Right.
and all that kind of stuff. I think the larger changes have probably occurred in some of the more maybe adjacent or maybe two neighborhoods away kind of thing
Right.
over time, where I think there's been increased demand for more affordable housing and things of this nature. And so,
Right.
where they're, Fan Museum District have always sort of been the 800-pound gorillas, I think. Maybe Fan more than the museum, but yeah, I think so. I don't know that the Fan is fundamentally different than it used to be, but I think, Jackson Ward is, and some of the neighbors, Southside, Bird Park, and places like that,
Right.
where you're shocked sometimes at the prices you see over there, but at the same time, hey, there's a reason,
Right.
and there's some really great houses all around there, and I think the people that were visionary, like as an example, there used to be a guy who bought a ton of the houses kind of behind Carytown, and. Yeah, and and you looked at these bungalows and you're like, why aren't these things trading? And you can walk to Carytown, and in every other city on the planet, like the fun retail and the high end retail, like that's always the most wealthy area. And in Richmond, it didn't work. And I never understood why. So there's always these opportunities, I think, around some of these one-off neighborhoods where if you got in early,
Yeah.
you just sort of naturally made a killing.
Yeah. What kind of price prints do you remember buying, like the 6 units or like the small apartment buildings? That
Yeah, I always thought like it kind of in. I had to adjust my thinking because I used to think in price per foot, and now it's really price per unit, really.
For sure.
And a 2-bedroom that's a large 2-bedroom doesn't rent for that much more than a small 2-bedroom. And so,
Correct.
what did we even? So it was a little 6-unit on Belmont. So that's Tom Rossman. That's actually I went to see it with Tom, and I was like, hey, Tom, this is it's it doesn't even cash flow, blah blah. He's condos, baby. I remember he said that. I was like, huh, that's interesting. And
To convert them?
Yeah, and it kind of
Yeah.
that's what we ended up doing. That was one of the first deals, and then there was another one over on Kensington that we did that was a little more luxury 4-unit. But I also realized too that getting back to this idea of skill, I'm not a good developer. I don't pay attention to the things I probably need. I'm more, does it look cool? If so, I can sell it. I think of it like from a sales perspective. And so I realized that I needed to probably not be a developer. I needed to much more be a salesperson for developers, because I spoke enough of that language that I think I was, pretty fluent and could explain a lot of things and whatever. But at the same time, I didn't have the ability to spend time like I needed to arguing about, the cost of this and the cost of that. It just, did it look cool? That's what I was worried about, and that'll get you killed.
what would make a good developer in your mind that you did not have? Like, I guess the attention, or not that you didn't have it, what you weren't passionate about learning or doing, right? So like, was it the attention to detail or arguing about all the little details of construction and this and that, or was it just like
A combination of that stuff, I think. Also, I've found that, the best developers are always the best financiers. They pay the least amount for money as anybody, get the best terms, slide the risk onto the other guy's side of the plate, not their own. I just wasn't savvy enough to know how to do that. And again, so my sense was I was very good at valuing property. I was very good at understanding the look and the feel and what needed to be there. But I just didn't really have the again, maybe it's just the fortitude to argue with contractors about this, that, or the other. And so, I was probably paying more for construction than I should have. We built some cool looking stuff,
Right.
and we pegged the prices pretty accurately, but it didn't feel, it just didn't feel like I was probably the best at doing that. And so I think I was smart enough, or maybe just the market was smart enough to tell me I shouldn't be doing that and just get into sales.
Did you partner with developers, or did like Tom play that role?
Sort of, but not really. I think we did the ones we did. I did a couple with one partner, and then other than that, it was mostly just kind of stuff we did on our own. We did get involved with a bigger project up on North Side. We bought 176 apartment units that we still own today. We were going through the process of converting them when the market kind of turned around, so we just hung on to those apartments. So, but still own that deal with partners, and it's been great. I wish I owned more,
Of course.
But, I think, I hear you've also talked about, and I think Duke kind of said the same thing. It was like, when you're building a business, it's hard to build the business and then also do the outside investing, because something's going to suffer. You can't half-ass two things.
Yep.
You got to kind of whole-ass one thing.
Yeah.
And so, when One South kind of started, it was heads down, build this thing, partially intentionally, but also partially just because it just sucked up all your time to do it, because you're building, you're riding the bike while you're building it.
Right.
And so that really took and so we didn't buy as many things in that period of time, for what it's worth. And I wish in many ways, I'd have been smart enough to take advantage of the discount that occurred from, call it 09 to 11 or 12, where the market was still in recovery mode.
I often will joke, like, if you see me and I'm in really good shape, my business is probably suffering.
Yeah.
And then if I'm completely out of shape and like unhealthy, my business is probably on fire.
Yeah.
It's like there is no,
when you're pale and angry.
You're
probably doing a lot of business.
Yeah. There's no balance in this world of like business ownership, or at least like, I don't know that you could probably find balance, but I don't know that any of us actually want to. Like, it's just not what we do, right? You're all in on whatever your idea you're focused on. So like, it was interesting to hear in the conversation with Duke, like him say that, because I'd done the same thing. Like I jumped in heavy into buying investment property and like was all in on that, and then was also growing Peak, and then Peak just took off, and I was like head down on Peak for years and just stopped buying investment property. And then started a little bit, and I was like, well, now Peak is so it was never like, I've struggled for 8 years. I've been doing this of like, how do you do both consistently at the same time at a high level? And if it's not done at a high level, I don't want anything to do with it. Like if you're just kind of, like you said, like half-assing it, I don't want anyone to look at Peak and be like, well, he's just half-assing that. Or look at the investing and the relationships I have on that side and just be like, well, he's halfway in. Like, I just don't want to do that. So it's very hard to do both.
Couldn't agree with you more. And I think you also find that when you are trying to do both, it almost becomes more work than you could ever imagine, because you're constantly picking up pieces where you've dropped things, or whatever. And you got to kind of pick and choose your lanes a little bit. And I guess there's certain people out there that can kind of compartmentalize what they do. I'm not really one of them. It's like I just kind of have to do the one thing. So
you got into tax credits, abatements, enterprise zones, things like that. How did you learn all this, or did you bring people on your team that had this expertise, partner with them? Like, how did you get into all that stuff?
I had a very fundamental understanding, not a great understanding, just kind of the basic understanding of how the credit programs worked or whatever. I saw where most of the developers that were doing, whether it was Emmerich Flats or Reserve Project or Marshall Street Bakery or these things that had all been done with credits. The abatement program was pretty powerful because it really helped offset the cost of the dues in many cases. And so I got very fluent in explaining how credits work to buyers, and I got very fluent in how explaining abatement. Didn't really understand the enterprise zone until we actually built and renovated our office. I remember Chris Johnson at Monument kind of really helped us with that. He really, he almost did it. We secured it. He did everything else from there. It was total win for all of us. And I remember him looking at the project. He goes, "Oh man, this is the holy trinity. You've got, it's contributing, so it's a credit project. You're going to get abatement on it, and because you're in an enterprise zone, you're probably, and I don't know how much it'll be. I think we got a check for like $90,000 or something. About a year later, that was cool. That was great for the fund budget. I learned a lot through that. I mean, some of these, the abatement program has essentially gone away, which is, I still don't understand why that, it works, so let's get rid of it. And, I don't know that enterprise zones, I think, are still out there to some extent, but they're maybe not, as because there's so much more activity, the pie gets divided in a lot more ways.
Were you still doing a lot of retail sales at this side, like retail buyers and sellers and stuff, or were you kind of not really?
Well, I think what really changed was, I went and I pitched the developers of the Emmerich Flats. Somehow I got an intro there and convinced them that I was the guy to represent that project. That also led to a project in Churchill called The Reserve, which was 25th and East Franklin. It was an old warehouse and then like an empty lot. And so they built like 16 units of new construction and like 8 or 9, I think, in the warehouse side. And then Tom Rossman was partners with David Johannes of Johannes Design back in the day, and they had bought a little site in Randolph, and they dubbed it Tribeca, and it was a bunch of towns there. And just for whatever reason, I don't know whether I just raised my hand at the right time or said I know what I'm doing and people believed me, but I ended up being kind of a new project representative in this burgeoning infill kind of environment. And at one point, I think I just spent all day long driving up and down between Reserve and Emmerich because I was present for every showing. Because I had to explain to people what was going on. So I met a ton of agents, and it was kind of like, I sounded like I knew what I was talking about, and that actually then led for people knocking on the door saying, "Hey, we want to help, or can I come join, or whatever." And that kind of is what launched One South, was being more project represent orientation, I guess.
Yeah.
So there was some retail buying and selling that went on there, but my focus was really on the projects that we were representing and kind of being like the developer liaison. And so, I was actively selling, but then, once we kind of built the team around, I was more reporting and securing and then, trying to get the next deal that was going on or whatever. And so that kind of became more of my role than necessarily, being in the units themselves, trying to sell them. I mean, I still did that, but not. It was, Scott Garnett and Andrew Levine and Patrick Sullivan and Laura Wade and, all these people that were a part of that back in the day really took on the, the burden of the actual, blocking and tackling to get the sales done. And it was my job to go get the next deal.
That's awesome. And this is leading up or right around 2008.
Oh, it's absolutely. And it was funny because, we literally opened. I convinced Tom that we should, we kept looking around for I was laughing, there was always like 3 signs on a building, right? Like there would be like the broker sign, maybe then a rental sign, and then a commercial sign, so there was it was confusing to the public. And I was like, well, who could we, how could we find this right place? And I kept looking for the right place. And if you can't find the right place, well, you need to build the right place. And so that was kind of the origins of One South, was being like, hey, how do we create this multi-unit or multifaceted brokerage that handled both residential and commercial? Because in the suburbs you got a subdivision, and then you got like a strip shopping center in front of it, and there's a really clear delineation between what is residential and what's commercial.
Right.
But when you've got street level retail and then condos or apartments above, there's a lot more gray areas, and so you kind of have to be able to speak fluently about all that in order to serve the client. And so nobody could do that. If you ask an industrial guy, what should you do with land? Well, he's going to tell you industrial answer, or whatever, right? Like you kind of lean into your field of expertise.
For sure.
And what we tried to build was something that you bring us something, we're going to help you figure out if there is a market for the residential. If not, make it more commercial or whatever.
Right.
So we spoke kind of all the languages, and I think that was one of our strengths back in the day. Is we could put one sign on the building, answer all the phone calls, and that was kind of the origin of One South.
What made you and Tom get along so well?
He's just easy to get along with. I don't know. I mean, just first thing I will say about Tom Rossman is he's probably one of the hardest working people I've ever met. I mean, if he sat down at his desk, he was either answering an email, sending an email, or making a call. I've never seen him. There's one thing I don't want to die and come back as is Tom's iPhone, right? Like you would just work way too hard.
Yeah.
And so I just had an incredible amount of respect for his work ethic.
Yeah.
And I also learned, if he has a superpower, it's that even when someone maybe, I don't know, jams him a little bit, or just like it's something, they don't use him and they should have, or whatever. He never held it against anybody because there was always another deal coming down the pike. And I've seen so many times where I would be like, I can't believe they did that, and he's like, and then just hop right back on the phone and make another call, pitch a deal.
Yeah.
And so, it was just easy. And so, I think ultimately when we really began to take off was when people wanted to also come work for his commercial scene. And so like Justin Sled kept seeing, he would get this building leased up and operating perfectly, and then Tom would come in and sell it. And Justin was like, I did all the work, right? And and so eventually that made Sled kind of come over, from the property management side. And so that kind of led to, Ryan Riley did the same thing. And so Tom's built himself a great little team. And hopefully he continues to build it because
Yeah.
I just think they do a lot of really great stuff, and they operate a very specific niche.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that is just you kind of have to, once you're in that niche, it's hard to get ejected from it because he just has so many relationships across the board.
Yeah.
And I remember one of the monument construction guys used to say, I called Tom every Monday morning because I wanted to know what deals he'd heard about. Like that's how much Tom was in the deal flow back in the day. And again, this kind of predates CoStar. And commercial has never really flowed through MLS in the same way that it does. And so, the network was the most powerful thing you could build in that industry. And so, being kind of watching him do that at point blank range was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that commercial team is nuts. I mean, like the power and strength and the knowledge and experience they have on that team is just incredible. And that was one of the fun things that, when we're doing the small multifamily side, we've done a lot of different, mutual clients through property management, and they are either buying or selling or with the buyers or sellers or whatever these buildings. And just walking through properties with them, we're always on the same page. Like we just know they actually know how it works, like how they operate, how these properties operate versus just trying to make the transaction happen.
Yeah.
And that's really refreshing to us because we can have these conversations on the same level and be like, we have to live with whatever is told to this client during the transaction, right? And so if this team actually gets it and understands why the expenses are what they are, the income is, and how we can improve these different things, and then what these values actually are and how we can relate both sort of professionally relate this to the buyer or whatever, and whatever the situation is, it's just a way better outcome. Yeah. It's awesome. So let's talk about the great financial crisis before we get into the empire of One South that you guys built. What did that look like coming up to it? I assume no one saw it, and then it's here. What did that feel like? What was your experience with that?
So we were in the midst of representing, again, 3 or 4 different projects, and it was like literally when we opened up in January, the phone was still ringing off the hook. We thought we were the smartest people in the room because we were brilliant to do this. And by June or July, I'm like, is my phone like? Did I pay the bill? It just didn't ring. And it was at that point that we kind of really began to figure out what was going on. And so I'm going to go forward to come back. One of the things that I think One South is kind of known for is we're pretty data oriented. We're very statistical. We're all that stems from being simply caught completely off guard by 2008. Just never had any that was coming. And so once we kind of recovered and things stabilized or whatever, and you could kind of sense that the market had found its bottom and it was starting to rebound a little bit, and people were kind of entering in tentatively but coming back in. The overhang was kind of gone or had been absorbed or whatever. And so, things were pointing back up again. It began kind of more the statistical journey that we went on of like, how can we make sure that we can see around corners, right, and see what's coming without, and just not get caught, out over our skis again. It's a terrible experience. I mean, really, it is the scars of today I still carry because of what happened then.
What did it look like financially? Like, what was your day-to-day? Like, are you not paying bills? Are you struggling to get business? Well, like, what did you have to do to get through it?
In a weird way, I remember you actually, I don't know if it was Duke or who it was, but you were talking about like, it just changed where the money was. There was still money in the system. It just changed where it was. And so, if I were just a typical, resale agent, and someone had my house on the market for $400,000 or whatever, and the market was only allowing $350,000 for that house, and the seller couldn't, right? So they would just pull the sign up, and that deal was now gone from that retail buyer. We had 50 unoccupied units where the banks wanted it off their books, the developers wanted it off their books. And so, they were forced sellers. They couldn't sort of just rent their way out of this project. And so ultimately what we were able to do was get these deals brokered. So we still were doing deals because, and sometimes, very creative financing to say the least. Right. Banks took some risk and whatever. And so, but we had to get these things sold. And so they couldn't just pick the for sale sign up. We had to get through. So we were lucky in that we were still working with sellers that had to get things sold. Yep. And so for us, it was a lot of work. There were a lot of tears. There was a lot of, bruises and, egos that, took a beating or whatever. But we got through it because we just simply had to. Right. And so, I heard one developer one time say that, I think One South probably saved 5 guys from bankruptcy because we were able to get stuff brokered. I don't know if that's true, but I really was complimented by somebody saying that. And I think we worked really, really hard in those moments to get these things done at the highest price possible, but never let, you can't spit the bit. You got to get the deals across the goal line. And so it probably gave me more of almost a PhD in condo finance in many ways. And so I really, I learned a lot of, it was the the greatest 3 years of lessons of all time, and it really informed how we move forward from there. So.
Were you guys successful because you were able to somehow, because of your network, able to find buyers for these properties where other people couldn't find money anywhere? Or was it you guys just understood the assets so well that you could explain why other people should buy it and make the sale happen?
I would say that anytime we got anybody, we just made sure that there was no, we just wouldn't let anything block us from getting a deal across the goal line. And so I think that was just, just sort of a dogged determination. There's a word. To get these things done because you kind of had to. So I don't know that we were better or smarter, but I mean, there were a lot of cool buildings. And so, I mean, ultimately, prices adjust, but people still need a cool place to live. And I think there were some folks that, did understand that this wasn't going to go on forever and whatever. And so, if you enter the market in 2010, you don't really know what happened. Right. I think it's the people that had bought in 06 and 07 and then saw immediately their property values go down that probably, have even bigger scars than the people that maybe entered a little bit afterwards. So, ultimately we just got them all sold. And, there was a lot of problems. There was, I think Nolde Bakery actually pulled up the for sale sign at one point and just rented them out and weathered the storm. And there was a couple units here and there that we might put tenants in. Right. But generally speaking, it was, let's get these things sold. And we did.
Yeah. Unfortunately, things bounced back, a couple years later and kind of sorted itself out. But you and Tom are now on this One South journey, which, again, bouncing ahead is just incredible. Like just an incredible team on the residential and the commercial side. You guys wanted to serve both under the same roof and kind of just be essentially full service for any buyers and sellers in this market. Tons of awesome people at this agency. Why did you lean towards residential and he leaned towards commercial? Like, was there ever really a discussion, or is that just where things fell and where your expertise lied?
I just think there was just a lot of momentum in the space. I mean, Tom was just, when he started, he was a commercial broker, Spots and Carneal. I mean, literally had a metal desk and a phone book and a front office right there in Carytown. And he was just wired to just pick up the phone and call people. And I think, ultimately that's where he started and built his network. I always fight against this line between residential and commercial. I think that there's a much grayer line there than what people want to put it. And so for us, kind of being able to speak, fluently somewhat both languages, opened a lot of doors for us. And there was also a lot of, Tom would say, hey man, I got this, this thing here. What do you think? Could it be this? Yes. Or I've got a client that really, it's a high net worth individual that, we sold them a nice house, but they want to invest. Take it. Right. So there was that referral thing back and forth. And so again, the project business was not enough to sustain us wholly. So you had to do some, just basic resale as well. I think one of the things that we also did, in that vein was, when you can sit across the table from a developer and talk about, cap rates and absorption rates and all these kind of things and get some more advanced analysis, when you give that to just a retail client who's just going to, one-off sell it, they're like, I didn't expect this level of service, right? They kind of expect the high touch or whatever, and you're really giving them good data to make decisions. So I think we appealed not to everybody, but to a certain subset of the market very specifically, and we were the only ones that were going to be used. Because I think the expertise, just by like osmosis you used earlier, just being around it, you absorb a lot of that, and that became, I think a competitive advantage for us.
There's been a number of times that I've referred One South because there wasn't any other brokerage that would understand.
Cool.
Good. And I respect that. And there's some good brokerages in Richmond. I mean, there's tons of powerhouse, awesome brokerages in Richmond. But they are very niched in what they do very well, right? And great, good for them. They built incredible businesses off that. But there have been quite a few times where I've referred One South because I'm like, they know exactly what your situation is. And I don't know that other people have such a vast experience or vast network of this group that knows exactly how to deal with this mixed use building in the fan.
I think ultimately, we tried to build a business and not a brokerage. We're in the brokerage business, but it was more of a business. And again, we talked a little bit.
That's a good way to put it.
Kind of challenging certain, maybe long-held conventional wisdom. If you do things, always do the same thing over and over again, eventually those ideas get tired. And so, we kind of came in with a contemporary. I mean, I can't tell you sometimes actually we got laughed at when we first opened up. Like, really? You're a condo sales company selling in Jackson Ward, with a contemporary logo? What are you guys, nuts? This is Richmond. And then, 3 or 4 years later, they're like, can we chat? Can I bring my license over? So, we took a few, I'll just say some people probably snickered at us when we first got started.
For sure.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
If the right people are kind of chuckling at you, that probably means you're doing the right job.
Right, for sure. Yeah. You had mentioned that you blogged a lot early, like
Yeah.
in those early years. And I would bet probably not a lot of people were blogging. What was the reason for that? And then why writing? Like, is it something you enjoy?
A little kind of funny sidebar. I got 2 Ds in my entire career in school. One was in English and one was in computer science. And, now I basically handle all the technology for our company and do all the writing. So there's your public education.
It's awesome.
Yeah, someone just said, essentially it was, again, you have to kind of go back to the, call it 2007 or 8, and, SEO and Google and, ranking and, Zillow was out there now. And so people were competing for, I think, top of mind, not in the, classified ads in the newspaper, but, when you opened up a laptop and made an inquiry, who showed up and where showed up. And so, we wanted to be leading in that, and so the best way to do it was just start writing. And so, I'll go back and look at some of the stuff we wrote probably as early as 2012, and I just laugh at it. Like,
really?
That was such a bad article. But it just sort of stayed with us, and so it's begun kind of, I think, a integral piece of who and what we are. It allows the public to vet you and see the difference. Like, there's a great book by Alberto Barabasi, and it's The 5 Laws of Success, and he talks about, it's easy to judge the fastest person in the world, right? Like, because that's on a stopwatch, or in a pool or whatever. So,
right.
To the victors go the spoils. And it's when it's easy to identify the true leader. It's really hard in real estate. Like, agents know who the other good agents are,
Right.
but the public can't tell. The only cue they can take is, do you sell a lot, and do I see your face, or whatever.
Right.
And so it's hard for them to tell who's good, and they equate, some level of maybe, top of mindedness with being great. It's not always accurate.
Right.
And so what we decided to do was demonstrate that we know things, share our knowledge, and that has been kind of a big deal. Most people kind of want to hoard their knowledge. Sharing it, I think, is a much more powerful. Sometimes sharing you get burned because people will use that against you, or you're educating your competition or whatever. But ultimately, I think, in the grand scheme of things, the checks in the positive column are much better than
For sure.
much larger than the negatives. And so we continue to write. And it was funny. So we've kind of, we've written in different places. We've written on websites, that were designed to be found by Google. And so ranking high and getting people to, kind of register and then helping them out. Was a huge part of our business, but essentially Zillow eventually kind of won that battle, and you can't out Zillow, and so we had to find other ways to do it, and so we've kind of migrated now more of the Substack or kind of blogging type platforms, and just sort of just having an audience versus trying to really play like an SEO ranking,
Right.
Registration game.
Right. Keywords.
Correct. And so, and the new AIs of the world are even better at identifying expertise. And so, I think there's an opportunity here for us to kind of get back to maybe a little more of a higher ranking, because, Zillow is great at showing everything, but they don't have the personal knowledge that people have when you're, I can tell you about every unit and probably every building in Richmond. Zillow can't make that distinction. And so sharing that knowledge, I think, again, is something that will ultimately pay off, and so that's one of the commitments that we have.
What can readers expect to learn if they go to your Substack?
Depends. Sometimes it's just written with an update on the market, but again, kind of in a let's dispel the rumors kind of a way. I think what triggered the last one was someone sent an agent to one of our agents and said, "Oh, the market's going to crash again. Credit debt is too high, or credit card debt is too high, and here comes 2008 again." And I was like, I disagree. We're in an inventory-starved environment. Underwriting on loans is a lot healthier than it ever was. And then I actually went back and kind of did a comparison to where we were in '08 and where we are today. And I got more comments back on that thing than I've gotten on any one of my blogs in a long time.
That's awesome.
Just simply because they're like, yes, you're right. I hadn't really thought about it in those ways. And so, I think just, again, nothing is either, 100% or 0%. There's always there's always gray areas and it's a gradient. And, sometimes if you're in a house, you're in an area where they're building a lot of new housing, well, that market might be a little softer. But if you're still in, Fan District where, there's 10 people that want to buy every one house, okay, well, that's going to be a completely different dynamic. And I think teasing out that subtlety is important. And again, I think you get a lot of national news that people, we wrote an article one time, click here for fear, right? It's like, we are wired as human beings to be overly afraid of things
Right.
because that's what kept you alive when we lived in caves or in trees or whatever. And so, the people that were very conservative lived the longest. There's a risk aversion, I think, baked into everybody.
Right.
And so when you see a little bit of negative news, it immediately grabs you, right? Newscast, if it bleeds, it leads. Like that kind of fear selling is what drives eyeballs and clicks
Right.
or whatever.
Yeah.
And so we're constantly kind of dispelling the rumor because people want to take a national stat and apply it to our
Yeah.
market.
Yeah.
And real estate is fundamentally local.
That's exactly what I was going to point out is like there's the smaller investors will look at national headlines and apply that to Richmond or the Richmond market,
Yeah.
where they could go to your Substack and look and see kind of your opinion of what is actually happening in the Richmond market
Correct.
based on your experience and the network that you have around you and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Cool. So we might shout it out again at the end of the podcast, but it's rickjarvis.substack.com is where you can
correct.
go get that information. That's awesome. That's good that you started doing that earlier. And I also appreciate as a business owner that it's not like just we did at Peak got into the world of blogging, but it's largely been like the keyword battle, right? And so we've made sort of a shift in the past. We've begun discussing internally that I want the blogs to actually mean something, to add value, to not just be loaded with keywords for SEO. Like it hurts me to go see that on our website, admittedly, where I'm like, no one's going to read this blog and get a ton of value and information out of this. And I really want to start doing better there and not just focus on just SEO and AI and really put out some good information. And a lot of that comes with like this podcast, the interviews, and some other stuff we're doing on social media, some other ebooks that we're looking at putting out and stuff like that. We really want to get like the blogs need to follow suit and stop being so keyword heavy and start being actual readable, useful information.
Yeah,
I think that'll serve us in the long run.
And again, I think things like we've never done a podcast. I maybe tried once and it was so miserably awful that we just kind of just hit delete and we'll never do it again. But I think anything that has to do with helping people who aren't familiar or just or neophytes or whatever hear these things and all of a sudden they're like, oh, okay,
Right.
I want to work with that person. They
Right.
know what's going on. And I just think, to me, any form of good content educates and it differentiates. And
Right.
so that's, it's funny, like one of the things that typically I'll go back and look at is if somebody asks a question and, you end up with one of those 300 to 400 word kind of email responses back to them, there's your blog. Right? Or there should be your podcast or whatever it is. If you've already explained a complex topic, odds are if that person had a question, there's another 100 people that have the same version of that question or a slightly different version of that question. Just turn it into a blog. And I can't tell you the number of times that, like what really hit me was we had a client, it was at the Emmerich Flats, and, a guy called on the sign and, I'm showing him a unit and he's, kind of one word answering me, obviously just not engaging. So I just kind of stepped back and I'm like, that's fine. And we got done. And I said, look, whether you like this or not, you need somebody to represent you. I said, why don't you Google me and, see what you see. And if you think that we would work well together, I'd love to help you. He called me the next day and called me sir. I'm like, so he'd read an article and was like, okay, this guy knows what he's talking about.
And you just got instant credibility.
So exactly. It's a street cred. So I can't tell you the number of times I just sent an article to somebody and just said, hey, and all of a sudden, you're the subject matter expertise person. And again, it elevates your status in their mind because now they can vet that you actually do know what you're talking about. And all of a sudden, the questions go from, kind of veiled ways of trying to tease the information out of you without letting anything on to, okay, help me with this, right? And so I always tell people the moment that you're looking for with any client is for them to go, huh,
Right.
I hadn't thought of that. Once you have that, all of a sudden, the power dynamic kind of shifts and they realize that you are going to be additive to the situation and they should want to work with you because you could help make this thing go smarter, smoother, faster, whatever it is. So,
yeah, it is quite the light bulb moment when people realize that you actually can help and add value and know what you're talking about and have some sort of credibility. Or that could be because you know someone, you have mutual friends, like you're in some sort of group or network, or you have different licenses, or you have, you own the company versus work for the company or anything like that, for whether that's right or wrong, because I've hired many people that are smarter than me at a number of things. But you guys grew from just a couple of agents to what, like 120?
I think at our height, we were like 120 agents and staff.
So that's a lot.
It is a lot.
Did it ever start to feel like less real estate and more leadership?
100%.
How did that work out for you? How did that feel for you? Did you enjoy it? Were you passionate about that, or were you trying to stick closer to the real estate?
No, I
side
think
of things?
that, at some point, I can't tell you when it happened. I mean, I can tell you the moments where I almost broke along the way. But ultimately, I think that, when you get to the point where, we just had a really good team around us, and we had, one of my favorite things about everything we've done is if you go look at our record at D4, we have a perfect record.
Awesome.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, and even MLS fines and things, we get fined at like 1/40th of the rate of the average or whatever. So we were, we pushed the limits on a lot of things about what we did. We never pushed them when it came to, client experience, that compliance kind of component of our business. But it's a very expensive part of the business as well to make sure that you do. Some people just handle it with insurance. Other people handle it with actually doing the right job the first time.
Right.
We really had some good people in place, and things were really firing on a lot of cylinders. And, but you could also, we were sized, like you're always chasing scale, right? And ultimately, I began to see some people coming to town that, were offering increasingly better splits. And you could also, in the post, 2.9% mortgage world, it sucked all the transactions forward, and then people sat on 2.9 and weren't going to sell anymore. And you could see the transaction count starting to drop. And our infrastructure was based on, close to 1,000 transactions, and I was like, this is not going to be happening anytime in the near future again. And so, then it became the hard decisions that we had to make, and that's kind of when Samson came and knocked on the door a little bit and said, hey, look, we'll take this burden off of you. You just go back to being a team, and we'll take all the admin out of it. And I was like, done.
Yeah.
Exactly. So just they hit us at the right time. I'm not sure that's exactly the question you're asking, but that's kind of, getting from 120 people, we're still at 75 plus or minus. The commercial team obviously is split off, and they have their own infrastructure now separate. And again, a couple agents, just attrition over time. And we really haven't pushed growth as much because I wanted to kind of settle into the new system or whatever.
For
And
sure.
so we're kind of starting to get back
Yeah.
our feet underneath us a little bit more. And, we now understand what Samson brings, what what we're still responsible for doing ourselves. And so, but getting rid of the if the copier was busted, or if the the health insurance needed to be renewed. I mean, all these kind of things that have nothing to do with your expertise suck up all of your time, and that's where I think the stress for me was just I don't want to be negotiating a copier lease. I'd make that go away. I want to talk about where the market's going, and so that was kind of the struggle, if you will, of that size, because the admin crowds out.
Yeah, it pulls you away from your
vision.
passion, right? And we did the whole copier lease deal like a month or two ago. It came across my email. I was like, I don't want to. I said it differently, but in my head, I was like, I never want to see this email again.
Yeah.
Like, don't ever put this in front of me again.
Correct.
Like, this is not what I'm passionate about. This is not what I want to do. So I understand that fully, and that's what happens. Because when you're smaller, you're doing all the stuff that drives. You're doing a lot of stuff that you're not super, like you're putting out fires and there's a bunch of stuff you have to deal with when you're smaller. When you're bigger, you have a team that can support you. You have some admin staff and stuff like that, but there's still so much stuff that sort of pulls you away from what your expertise was or what really why you got in this company when you have 120 people on your team. But one thing One South did, at least in my experience, what I witnessed years of working with you guys, is the culture of One South, because every brokerage has like their own culture, right? And like kind of their feel and look and stuff like that. The culture of One South was incredible. It was phenomenal. Like every time I dealt with the agents, they were so proud to be at One South. You could just tell. You could like they don't even need to say it. They don't need to explain it. You just know. You walk in the office and it's just an awesome office environment. How did you and Tom maintain that culture from, let's say, 5 agents to 120?
There were several keys that we kind of realized along the way, and we kind of have like these 6 things that we kind of identified that we looked for. But the biggest one was no ego, right?
Awesome.
And so, the idea that, you have to put the deal above the individual. You have to put the client above the individual. And, you just, if you have a team of high ego individuals and all in the same room, that's great. They're going to challenge each other and probably energize each other and whatever. And, there's just going to be a competition amongst those people. That would have crashed our system. And similarly, I think we've really never had anybody in our system go into one of those environments because we like the self-starters. One of my term, autodidact, I think is a word I'm not fully sure I know exactly what it means, but essentially it means self-study, right? Like the people that kind of want to take on learning, being able to kind of walk in a room and command it. I think, even if you're making decisions and, without perfect information, like that kind of, those characteristics we kind of identified. And so when you put all those people together, generally speaking, everybody kind of got along.
Right.
And so, and I think that we did a lot of market stuff. We constantly were talking about, where the market was going. And so I think people felt very informed and not kind of on an island by themselves trying to figure it all out. Right. And then I think lastly, ultimately we wanted to separate sales from the back office operations. And so, we had a managing broker. First person we ever hired was a transaction coordinator. We had marketing people, whole 9 yards. So the agent really just had to go out and get belly to belly or whatever it is that they did to make their own phone ring. Go make your phone ring. We got the rest of it.
Awesome.
And so I think people really, kind of bought into that system. So, I guess that's part of the culture, and I just, we didn't, I think we tried on several occasions to maybe get a little bit further away from the core, and it never really worked. So I think the core itself actually protected us from making too many dumb decisions.
Yeah.
We made some, but not too many.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, one of our biggest day one things that I'll talk to new hires is just no ego.
Yeah.
Like just you walk around the office with your chest puffed out, trying to prove what you know, and just stop. You're on the team. You have a lot to learn. We have a lot to learn from you. Let's just get over that right now, and let's just start being ourselves, right? And we want big ego in a sense of super competitive, want to win, want to be the best, but as a team, not internally. Like that other property manager that sits a desk across from you, you need to want them to win more than you want yourself to win, and the whole team's going to do significantly, exponentially better than we would do if you just did good, right? And so that's what we've tried to stack our team with in that culture. But it's so hard to maintain as we grow. But fortunately, you get layers of leadership and layers of tenure and things like that to help that continue down the path.
Yeah, I think that's right. We also did a lot of collaborative team type environment. Like, when we would get a new project, it wouldn't just be one person. It would be 3 or 4 people.
Yeah, I noticed that.
And so, the good news is about that, if the project ever doesn't take off and you've invested, 6 months of your life, kind of make it take, and it doesn't, it can run you out of the business, right? And so by having, 3 or 4 people on this and 4 or 5 people on this or whatever, no one ever couldn't take a day off. Or, if there was a call that needed, there's a lot of people could help. And again, if something didn't go great, it wasn't a death sentence. It may be a bruise, but it's not a death sentence. And so I think that collaboration also kind of helped be a part of what we did. And I think a lot of people that came over, I want to be a part of that. I want to learn that. And so I think there was, a willingness to stand in line to be the next person to get one of those. And so, that maybe intentionally, unintentionally works somehow. I'm not really sure.
I mean, there's definitely, I think, ego-driven people are fine doing things themselves, and people that don't necessarily care so much about their ego are fine working as a team. And you work as a team, you can do way more. And I have noticed that with One South is there's often multiple people in the deal, multiple people.
I think Tom still carries that forward too. Almost everything that they do, it's Lori Markham and Chris Carrot or whoever. Or Ken teams up with Ann, and so there's absolutely a sharing environment over there. Again, we try to bring it to our side. On the individual housing stuff, it doesn't lend itself necessarily to multiple people working. Although we do have some smaller teams, but I think for the most part, just especially on the projects, we would collaborate, and I think it just drove a lot of that kind of culture being good. Pride and workmanship, but just low ego.
Right. We touched on this a little bit earlier, but how did you balance your personal investing or with partnerships or whatever, but like buying your own investment assets and also growing this empire of a brokerage?
Empire is a little bit of a strong word, but I appreciate it. I don't know that we did do a great job of it. I mean, I think, again, it's been more recently where we probably started to pay a little more attention to the investment side of things because so much of the administrative burden is now gone from, when we moved on to this new platform. So it's freed us up to maybe look at, and we've done actually a couple of things that have been kind of, pretty fruitful. Kind of makes you raise your eye and go, should I be doing more of that? And I think, being opportunistic about it is probably the best thing to do. But yeah, I mean, I think again, Sarah and I think we've accumulated a decent enough assets that, if we can just manage those till the, till the cows come home, we'll be pretty happy and live a much better life than I think either one of us have managed. Yeah. Again, I don't own the most by any stretch, but I own enough that, we're good.
And there's always the argument of do you want to own 100 or own 20 or do you want to own 1,000 or own 100? I'm sort of the guy that the lower number is fine as long as they're good assets in the right position with high equity and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So 2023, after however many years in business, I mean, you started One South in 2008. So 2023, you and Tom had discussed de-risking the business and the residential side would move to Samson and then One South Commercial remains One South Commercial. But then you guys split the properties or your offices and go to different platforms. Totally amicable, great relationship. What was that initial? What were those conversations like with Tom? Was there a lot of emotion involved, or was it just you guys knew it had to be done, or that's a lot of history to kind of unwind there?
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't really recall it being painful. I mean, we were kind of already running separate P&Ls anyway. We had some shared, shared common expenses, like we were in the same office, and we had some, employees that, obviously did stuff for both sides of the ledger. But from just a purely, accounting standpoint, we were pretty much running, our own P&Ls. What's interesting to me is that, a lot of technology got brought to the industry from when we started to where we were today. I mean, it was just an explosion of technology. And commercially, it maybe even was even bigger than even residentially. Because, we had MLS and a lot of online forms and things like that. And commercial, they just really didn't have that. And so over time, I think the platforms that they needed and the platforms that we needed just kept getting further and further apart. And so, it just kind of made sense. Like, just their needs and our needs were just kind of, had just evolved to a point where it was just different. And so, ultimately, I think when Samson knocked on the door and I kind of heard the pitch, I'm like, this makes a lot of sense to me. Tom kicked it around, but Samson just didn't really have a place for the commercial side yet. They hadn't really grown it or whatever. And so I think ultimately, he and his team got together, had conversations and said, hey, I think we should just kind of go this alone. So, okay. I mean, I was like, I fully understand. Great. And, I still am partners with them. They still manage my stuff. So it's like it used to be. We're just not I just have to drive 5 minutes away instead of walking, down the hall.
Right. How did your team of agents take it? Like, pretty straightforward, or was there?
Yeah. I mean, I think ultimately, the delta is between, what we had to charge per agent on a commission split versus what we can charge now. Went from, we did a lot, but it wasn't inexpensive. And so, One South was not the cheapest place to work by any stretch. And I think, as stress comes into market, people want to find lower and lower costs to run their businesses. And again, every new entrant that came in was just a notch or two below expense-wise. And so, there was already pressure on commission structures anyway. And so when we made the move, I think people were like, really? But then when we said, here's what the new commission split is, they're like, oh, well, we'll give this one a chance. And so I think they're finding that not a lot has changed. You can engage as much of the Samson stuff as you want to. They give you a tremendous tech stack and they're just big, right? They just buy in bulk that we just could never do. I mean, I knew I could never be competitive with them. And ultimately, the broker takes the risk because we have to sign the long-term contracts for this, that, or the other, whether it's tech or whatever. And agents can kind of free to move around as they please. And so ultimately, I knew it was going to be a race kind of downward in commissions. And so the infrastructure that we had relative to where I thought we were going to go, I knew there was going to be a big not equal sign somewhere in my future, and I didn't want to make that decision at the point of a bayonet. I'd rather do it, when we still had the ability to do it and do it the right way. And so that's kind of ended. That's the long and the short version of the reason why we did what we did. But I think the agents essentially, they loved One South. There was pride in it, but we were able to keep the team name alive. So I mean, people still see One South out there. It's One South that's powered by Samson. So I think people still lean into the One South side of things. But Samson just gives us a lot of firepower that we didn't have.
Same culture, Does it feel like the same work environment in the office?
Well, I'd say that the answer to that is a little bit different, and it's a little more subtle in that I don't know that it was the change from One South to Samson, or with the commercial and the residential team kind of deciding to operate under kind of different roofs. To me, the difference, COVID taught us to go home and sit in our third bedroom and never come back to the office. And so I think a lot of businesses have had to be forced to change how their culture looks, because people do have the ability now to just throw the laptop open in the third bedroom, buy a $500 printer off Amazon, and don't have to worry about trekking back and forth to the office. And so just the traffic in the office is down a lot more than it used to be. So we just have to find other ways to kind of communicate. And a lot of times that has to do with writing, basically, and market updates and things like that, and bringing people back in. So there's just not as many natural sort of collisions, if you will, between agents, because there's not a lot of people that use the office in the same way they used to. So has the culture changed? Probably, but I don't attribute it to the moves. I attribute it much more to that, that 2 or 3 year period where, everybody just didn't know what the hell was going on.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. What are you excited about over the next decade? Where's your focus going to go?
I used to think that Richmond was the northernmost southern city, okay? In that, we still were kind of, independent and, kind of insular a little bit, and we kind of held the Northeast at bay. That they're from the north or whatever. I think we're now the southernmost northern city, and I think that just every time I go up 95, I see another lane has gotten another mile down the road, and just there's been a migration out of the expense of the Northeast to the relative inexpense of Richmond.
Right.
If you actually go to Zillow, they've got some great data that they published, and you can look at pricing in, median pricing in DC and Richmond, and you can see that gap is closed by not a ton. It used to be a pure 2-to-1. Now it's like 1.7-to-1 kind of ratio. And so I just think slowly but surely we are getting absorbed into that Northeast corridor. I mean, at the end of the day, Richmond's 90 minutes from arguably the most important city on the planet, and we're, and we trade at a tremendous discount. And so the excitement to me is I just think the health of Richmond, there's just going to be a lot of tailwinds, right? Like it's just going to be easy to be in Richmond. If you own things, you're in a great position. Just don't screw it up and the market will take care of you. So I think that's good. Like the prospects of Richmond are great. I think secondarily, this ability for AI to help us do things, especially like, it's not just answering, asking, ChatGPT a question, getting an answer. It's a lot of the coding stuff that's now coming online, I think is going to democratize the tools of production. And so we're going to be seeing some really exciting things happening with people creating stuff that they were never able to create before. And to me, that's absolutely fascinating. I'm arms deep in it or elbows deep in it, trying to just learn how to, take, a lot of data and do even more analysis with it, faster, better, more accurately, and keep it updated a lot easier. It used to be like you'd do it and then it would just get stale because 3 months later you'd had to redo it all again, and it was just that process was just so overwhelming in many ways. This is like kind of set it up and fire and forget, because it'll update itself if you teach it how to do it correctly. And so I think that's absolutely fascinating to me.
Yeah, I'm getting into that too. We're building out all kinds of different AI tools, and the property management industry is getting flooded with that. And what it's going to do is just make us so much more powerful. The people who are adapting it and like willing to use it, for us, it's still, we have a lot of secure information, so we can't like embed it into all our systems yet until we know for sure like the security is in place. But we can certainly use it for a lot of different tools that a lot of different processes that we have to make things a lot more powerful and like provide a way better experience. And I'm a lot of people, again, like the fear versus whatever, I need to be aware of what's happening, but I'm very excited. Like I look at it and choose to be very excited about what opportunities that's going to provide versus the fear that comes with it. And we're just largely along for the ride. We just have to be well positioned when we do it.
I think it's a Henry Ford statement. A person with a machine is more powerful than a person without a machine. And so, if you can, I think a lot of people do have fear of being replaced. In reality, you should have, the excitement of being empowered.
Yeah,
right. And so
sure.
I think learning to use it and having the right attitude about it is, I think 99% of the battle. And again, but it's a new skill we've all got to learn, or most of us should learn. And I think, again, the tool is the magnification of your ability to do things. I've replaced, probably, I don't know, at least 10 grand in expense on a monthly basis with a $200 subscription to Claude.
Right.
So, let's go.
We noticed over the past, I think 12 months, our software costs had increased real close to 100%. And we have now looked at that and saw all the overlapping capabilities and what AI can do, and we can eliminate about half of that just over the next few months.
Yeah, it's been a big emphasis for us of getting those kind of fixed costs down even more, because I don't have to go and buy the subscription to this,
for sure,
and then get somebody else to make this talk to that or whatever.
Yeah, it escalated really fast for us.
Yeah,
and then we now are basically de-escalating that really quickly as well. So it's really interesting, like a roller coaster. But again, as long as we're aware and on top of it, good. It's just going to make us stronger. So
agreed.
Is there any particular asset class that you think investors should really be focusing on in the Central Virginia market over the next few years?
Yeah, I mean, I almost just say buy the average deal, because it's going to work out. I mean, we're not building enough housing to keep up, right? So there's a net influx of population that is growing Richmond from outside of Richmond. It's no longer just sort of like the natural growth of Richmond, 10 people have babies and there's 10 more people or whatever. It's people moving here and staying, right? And so they're seeking housing. And I don't know whether it's just the impact of the Chesapeake Bay Act or other, regulatory whatever that's just preventing housing from getting built. It's not even the housing, it's not even the builders, it's the lot supply. And so, talk to anybody at H-Bar and it's like, every time you read, I just read something this morning in BizSense, somebody in Chesterfield had proposed 500 houses somewhere, and by the time it was done, it was 100, right? And so, well, what does that mean? It means the price of the house is up, and the number of the houses is down, And we scream about affordable housing or affordability or even attainable housing, yet we do nothing about it.
Right. Yep.
And so I just think we're just stuck in that gear. So whether it's our inability to do things, our inefficiency in doing things, or whatever, but we will be in a housing deficit for a prolonged period of time. So buy anything basically.
Right.
But what I do tell people too is buy what you're comfortable with. Right. So if you don't really have great management, it might be harder to go buy, to start off with a 12-unit building somewhere because you're going to be over. Just get a simple house, And then, you also hear people like, oh, well, I don't want the toilet to break at 2 a.m. I've been doing this for 30 years. It's never happened. Things break. It's not at 2 a.m. Right. And if so, you deal with it in the morning. I mean, it is what it is. Right. And I think people have this, again, maybe back to Wired for Fear. I think they have irrational fears about ownership that they shouldn't have. And so, I just wish that, people would not worry so much about the negative things that can happen and allow that, the $300, $500, $1,000 problem to chew away the fact that, the house went up by 5% on a $400,000 house. That's a much bigger number than the $1,000 expense. Like they lose sight of the forest for the trees.
Yeah.
And so, do I have a favorite asset class? I think, again, anything below the reproduction cost in housing. So, if a new house, I think the median new home right now is getting close to $600,000 in Richmond. It doesn't mean you can't build one for $400,000, but you kind of can't. So if anything below that $500,000 range, buy it, sit on it, and you buy it, live in it, then go buy the next one, rent that one out, and do that 3 or 4 times, and daisy chain it until you have a little handful of these things, and you would be shocked in 10 years where you are.
Yeah.
So story and money where your mouth is. My daughter was class of 2020. And she came back to Richmond. Again, she went back to school for spring break, or tried to go back to school after spring break for her senior year, and they said, don't come back. So she finished, remote or whatever, came down to Richmond, and you could feel the impact of the low rates and all of a sudden the great migration of, COVID basically taught us that geography and employment are no longer as strongly correlated as they used to be. And so, that broke down that barrier. If you tried to live as close to your job to minimize your commute, now you can be in Richmond for 4 days a week and go up to DC once or twice or whatever, and you can cover a lot greater areas from areas of less expense. So I literally said, Molly, go buy a house over, near Willow Lawn somewhere. And she was like, okay, I think you're right. And so she was ready, and she did. She's a big girl, and said, I'll do it. And then, but I don't want to overpay. And I'm like, it doesn't matter. Get in the bidding war and win it. You have no idea what's coming. And so she's already on her 3rd house.
That's awesome.
I mean, I think she's probably up $100,000 on the one asset, and I think the rent's close to $3,000 now, where it started off at like $2,100.
Yep.
And she's like, yeah, okay, maybe that was a good idea. So again, I think just getting in the game for a lot of people in any way, shape, or form protects you to get to the next stage of the game. And I think the people that just kind of lose sight of that, they just end up losing.
Yep. And we see that often with investors that will buy properties and then come under our management, and they will have, a small repair in 1 year, and they look at the cash flow from it, but only the cash flow.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, you made maybe net positive a few $1,000s over the entire year. And they're like, why did I even buy this house? I'm like, man, you're not looking at the equity pay down, you're not looking at the appreciation, you're not looking at the tax savings, you're not looking at any of this. You're just looking at the few $100s a month that you made, and you think it's not worth it. And I'm like, oh my goodness, there's so much more to this. And we try to help. And some people will look at that and be like, oh, you're right. I'm actually making hundreds of thousands of dollars over the next couple of years, versus just selling this now and then paying taxes or whatever. So
a lot of times we'll do that. We'll go back and I'll reset the market for 5 years ago. And I'll just say, let me show you what where houses were trading at 5 years ago. And all of a sudden you kind of see the lights starting to flicker on a little bit, time is your friend.
We've since created these calculators using AI, but creating these calculators that try to show people this, where it's like, hey, look, you had this $200 repair, your asset cash flow $200 this month. It's not it's not just sell the house, right?
Yeah.
There's a whole other game to get into rentals. But anyway, so how can people find you if they wanted to get in touch with you?
Hey, just Google me. I'm pretty available. Cell phone's there, names there, emails there. So Lord knows I get enough spam stuff and whatever. But I mean, it's just part of the, when you live kind of in a public job, if you will. We
Right.
kind of have a public job. You have to be available. And so, you can kind of just Google me and find me. I've made it pretty easy to find. If you want to read, again, that Substack account,
Yep.
follow it. Again, I don't push stuff out every day. Sometimes sometimes I'll go a couple weeks.
It's probably some great history to go read, though. And,
Yeah, I mean,
they can get an idea what kind of stuff you're putting out, too.
I think that's true, and even and at some point, AI will help me do this. Go back and get the older articles from again 10 or 15 years ago, and you could see where the thinking was then, and follow the logic and see were we right or were we completely off base. And I think in most cases, we've been pretty accurate about where the market's heading and why. It's not just where I'm not just a myopic kind of optimist. Like I lived through 2008. I realized that they can take the rug out from under you at any point in time, and you never see it coming. But here's where we, when it started to firm up a little bit, we said so. When you started to see the inventory starting to drop, we started to say, okay, expect some price increase. Like you can see the things, and we've gotten much better at looking at those things and kind of being able to understand the reasons why these things are happening and how much you can attribute to, migration versus interest rates versus building starts versus all these other kind of things that drive markets. They're all just a collection of inputs, right? And so which ones are the most important? I think you can talk about each one of those individually and not just try to lock on to, well, credit card debt is elevated, therefore the market's going to crash. Like, okay. I mean, then don't buy, right? We'll see you in 2 years and you'll try to buy back at the price that you wanted 2 years ago, and you're going to be behind the eight ball again. So, anyway.
Yeah, makes sense. I'd rather get my information from you than like a co-star that has tons of data, but it's so like nationally comparative and stuff like that. It's just it's so hard to like. You've been in this market for decades. You've been in real estate for 25 years in this market at least.
30. You got a license in 93, so 20.
Oh yeah, 93. Yeah. I was thinking 2003. For
30 plus years.
Yeah,
I hope it works out.
Yeah, good. I'm glad you did, man. Yeah, so we have rickjarvis.substack.com, and then we also have onesouthrealty.com, which takes you to Rick's brokerage. Any final thoughts? Anything we didn't cover?
No, I think this is great content what you're doing, and I'm sure you're learning as you go as well. I find that kind of like in the way that when we write, a lot of times I'll start down a pathway on writing something, and I'll realize halfway through that I have no idea what I'm talking about, which then in turn forces you to go do research, and then you kind of learn a new skill. And so I would imagine that this kind of environment where you're interviewing people and whatever, you're probably learning a lot from each person as you do this. So I think it's just going to make you better as well at what you're doing. So I applaud you for doing this, and I'm just honored that you would ask me to come in here and talk about myself for an hour.
Yeah.
So hopefully somebody will get a nugget out of this.
Oh, absolutely. And selfishly, I have, and I do. Like I learn a lot from these conversations, and a lot of times it puts me in uncomfortable positions because with your vast experience and all of your knowledge, like I have so much I can learn from you, and having these conversations to me is just selfishly, it's awesome. I get to learn a lot, and then hopefully, I hope the same for some people in the audience can learn a lot, and they can get to know you, and then they also will see you as a person that can add a lot of value to them if they need help in some of these areas or want to be a part of the team or something like that. So thank you for coming on the podcast and sharing your journey and the information and knowledge that you have. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you made it easy. Appreciate it, man. Thanks.